Welcome to the Epsilon Room to Grow podcast, where we talk about all things growth with the industry's best minds. So, let's hear it from the ones who made it to the top in their own way. Join your host, Neha Pathak, and power up your growth story.
Today, we're diving into an interesting question. Is motivation really all it's made up to be? We hear all the time that motivation is the secret sauce to productivity and growth. But maybe there's something even more important. Mindset, perhaps? So, in this episode, we'll explore how your mindset can actually play a bigger role in achieving long term success at work. So, my speaker for today is Mr. Rahul Baswani, who is a partner for South Asia at Lumina Learning. Now, Rahul is an internationally recognized executive coach. He brings a wealth of expertise in leadership development, executive coaching, and talent assessment. He's also a trained hypnotherapist and clinical counselor. He's held solo painting exhibitions in Delhi and Seoul. Such fascinating hobbies, Rahul. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Neha.
Rahul, you come from the world of learning and development and obviously have been a coach for so many years. So you definitely must have heard the phrase, "I'm not feeling motivated," by people who come to you to seek help. In such situations, when motivation is failing you, what role can mindset play?
Oh, absolutely, Neha. And you're right. I mean, most of the time, people come reactively rather than proactively when it comes to things like coaching or seeking help. And for me, it goes back to the old story of Alice in Wonderland, when Alice meets the Cheshire Cat and asked her, "Where is this road going?" To which the cat countered by saying, "Where do you want to go?" And, Alice shrugged her shoulders, says, anywhere. And a very instructive message comes out from the cat's response. She says, if you don't know where you're going, any road can take you nowhere. I always laugh at that statement because it describes so much of what happens to us. When people talk about motivation or absence of it, I usually want to examine the two things separately. Is it internal or external motivation? Oftentimes at workplace or business, sometimes incentives become lacking in excitement. When people are talking about lack of ROI and things like money, or they are talking about sometimes just fame and positioning, these are all external motivations. And I really think the heart of it all lies in the internal motivation that Dan Pink talked about. There's a book called Drive that he wrote, where he talked about the three pillars of internal motivation, which were fundamentally autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So as a coach, I borrow from that and I looked at, are people getting self-directed? Are they enjoying a sense of autonomy? Are they getting better at something? Because when you're better at something, you want to take that capital out there. And finally, is there a meaning, purpose, something that's bigger than themselves, something that might even outlive them in what they're doing? Of course, when people are hijacked or locked, mindset plays a part. Oftentimes, I'm just sometimes looking for people when there is no choice but to move forward, to take the first step. And at that point in time, the conversation that I have is about celebrating even the small incremental steps and progress they've made, not necessarily the outcome. But as a coach, I can tell you, a lot of these conversations would be so much more helpful if they are had before they launch into something. And like I said, unfortunately, people only come to have these conversations most times when they're stuck. So, yeah.
Interesting that you say that, Rahul, because many people rely on motivation a lot when they're trying to kickstart new projects, as you were talking, or, maintain productivity. Do you really believe that motivation is perhaps overrated in sustaining this long-term success?
I mean, I won't say it's overrated. I think motivation is key, no doubt, but motivation certainly has its limitations. So, back to the idea, what I talked about is extrinsic versus intrinsic drivers. I mean, it goes without saying that intrinsic drivers will hold you in the long term. It'll help you to prevail when hiccups come, and when real life meets you, hiccups come. Sometimes I meet people And when I talk about what they're doing, you can pretty much pick up that they just did it not because they thought it through, but it just felt like the good thing to do. You'll be surprised at the number of things that people kick off simply out of a sense of FOMO. For those who are listening, many of us, me included, I'm sure if there are things that we launched off, projects around getting fitter or developing a musical skill, learning a language, and multiple things like that. Many times it was just an impulse thing because somebody else was doing it. Those kind of things, unless you've done some self-examination, tend to run out of steam very quickly. And frankly, the reason for that is in anything that you do, most of the hard work is in the upfront because we have no skill, we have no background. Results in the beginning are small and therefore it takes a lot of long-term determination rather than just simple short-term motivation to survive the grind in the beginning. The results only start to come after a lot of effort being put in. Same thing for business. You talk to a lot of people when they talk about why more than 90% businesses cop out or what is the long-term purpose for which they're doing what they're doing. For example, many people will launch off a food venture just because they're good at cooking. But it's very easy to overlook the grind. And you'll only survive the grind if you have a long-term internal motivation. So equally, you will find that many projects are kicked off without adequate market research. People don't even stop to think if it's feasible in terms of their own expertise, the available time, available money. But then again, there are many entrepreneurs, even in our own world. You see someone like PVR, the whole idea of redefining how movies are watched, or something like a Zudio, which is bringing style to the masses. And it's not that all purpose-based ideas are always successful. Like Nano was a noble purpose, that little car that Tata launched, but it didn't have a successful outcome. But recently, I discovered that Nano is being relaunched. So the long-term vision is still alive. Many times I also find that people are motivated with very personal incentives. So, for example, Stuart Desson built Lumina assessments because he went through his leadership journey and discovered that most of the psychometric assessments had evaluative bias. Now, so he wanted to create an assessment that celebrates each individual for who they are rather than boxing them into who they should be. Now, this is what you call internal motivation. When we celebrate the effort, small learnings, then I think we are able to survive the hiccups. We may not always get the conventional success, but we will always get progress. And to me, the final thing to say here, Neha, is that we are ultimately all working for ourselves, no matter what we do, right? And we all have a sense of purpose we are looking for. And this is where I think growth mindset becomes even more important, because in growth mindset, we are looking for the small incremental progresses, this long journey towards success, because success is not an event. It's a long-term odyssey, a human odyssey. And therefore, a growth mindset gives us the resilience that is critical to staying on path.
You introduced two concepts, one definitely of FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, which many of us relate to, and the concept of growth mindset. In today's context, like especially in our world of tech, professionals are very aware of this need to constantly stay updated because technology changes really rapidly. And with every new tech, every professional has that feeling of FOMO that, oh, there's this new thing called AI and I need to learn it, right? Now, this constant need to keep learning, updating, it comes with a huge amount of stress because you have to stay relevant. Now, in such scenarios, because most of our audiences here are technologists, how does adopting what you're calling a growth mindset impact how tech professionals approach challenges or failures, especially in the workplace?
We are fundamentally herd animals. Therefore, I always believe that social connections are being part of something bigger is very critical, right? And I find that most times when people find themselves cornered, painted up against the wall, what helps to know is that you're not alone. And if you think about it, even VCs will tell you that 8 out of 10 investments are cop outs. I had mentioned to you that I'm very closely connected with the art world. I also paint. And I'm talked to art collectors and they have a similar view. They said like most of the times things won't work out. So therefore, what I'm saying to the IT professionals is that you're not alone in the challenge of constantly falling short. I mean, if you look at the medical experts, the doctors, they all are also having to constantly reboot. Am I trying to minimize the problem of the IT professionals? Certainly not. But I'm also reminding them this is a dynamic world. 30 years ago, we invented the phrase that change is the only constant. So, first of all, know that this is a reality of what we live in. And therefore, the answers are a little bit more widely available. But first, let's take a look at the source problem. Oftentimes, we are too married to results and conventional measures of success, which becomes the fixed mindset. It celebrates more the result, the outcome, the popularity, the so called talent, rather than the effort that goes into it. Most of our education system is still rote based. In fact, there was a research, I wish I could pull up the details, but where parents who were interviewed established that almost 85% of the parents said that intelligence is fixed. But we know that now there's no research to the contrary. Trouble with looking at a problem with one mindset and one way to solve it and one way to approach things is that our peripheral vision gets blocked. Most of the things that get solved are solved on the periphery. You know those famous Google timeout where people are allowed to go and do work on their own without something that is outside of their job scope, just an experimental process. Google credits a large number of their inventions have come out from that slack free time. So point is that experimentation, small improvements, comfort with failure, little incremental progresses, those are the key. And I want IT professionals to remember that there is a real challenge. You are creating something that hasn't existed. Many times the creations happen as an outcome, as an accident. And once it's done, you have to put yourself out there. So one thing that I would say that when failures, shortcoming, lack of success is such an ongoing part of one's career and one's daily existence, then the key has to be on what you learned in the process. What were the small steps that were done forward? And most important, building the ability for resilience. So that's a whole other topic. But in summary, know you're not alone. Know it's a reality, change, challenges is not going away. And build the human capability called resilience that sees us all through in the long term.
This has really been great, Rahul. So let's kind of, bring it all together and talk about how can we bring these concepts that we've just discussed, which is fantastic, into implementation. So if I were to ask you that, could you share 2 to 3 practical strategies for cultivating this growth mindset for our listeners, especially for those, who struggle to maintain motivation over time?
First of all, growth mindset is not a switch that gets flipped on. There is a reality we all have. We have personal circumstances, we have our history, we have our genetics, and our own personality. These things all play a part. Therefore, some things will come easier to us and some things will come easier to other people. But through effort, whatever we need to do, we may not become the best, but we can all get better at. And that is true for all. And I think that's a very critical thing to understand. That we, in a way, we are all in the same boat. We might be sitting in a different seat in the boat. Next thing is, it's so easy to think of certain personality factors which are trending to be seen as better or worse. Like for example, when the whole personality cult started in the mid 1900s, extroversion versus introversion, we started to perceive that everything was stacked in the favor of the extroverts. But we know now that's not entirely true. I mean, extroversion certainly brings its own advantages, certain social capital, ability to meet with people. But in terms of outcomes, introverts have their own fabulousness. I don't like to label someone's character by mindset. I think of mindset as a process, something that we can situationally deploy. It is very critical that all of us know that mindset is not a static thing. Over time, our view of the world changes. With experimentation and experience, what we see, how we look at the world, what our belief systems are also evolve. Now, how do you deploy growth mindset? First of all, one needs to set up the context. You have to think of it in a context of a project or an idea or a situation. What is it that you're trying to do and what is your motivation to do it? If it's something short term, then you can use your own mindset or use other people's mindset simply by ordinary incentives. I do something, I get the job done, I watch a movie. But we know this is what we are talking about. Right now, we are talking about things that can be sustained in the long term. So, again, we bring in internal motivation. What I'm about to take on as a challenge, will it give me self direction? Will it help build a better me? Will it help me to create something that will be meaningful and purposeful? Those are some of the questions that should be asked of oneself at the very outset. So, in summary, what can one do? First of all, set context, define rationale, clarify objective, outcomes that you will get, and take the first step. That's what I get people to do as a coach. Because one thing is true, the race only gets shorter and it looks more and more possible once you cross the halfway mark. Hopefully that gives a few ideas to people on how to get going.
Such great advice to part on, Rahul. I'm taking so much away from this conversation. I'm very keen to do my own Lumina Spark and do a little bit of self awareness to understand what my personality type would be. It's been such a pleasure having you on this show, Rahul. Thank you for all the insights.
Likewise, and thank you so much, Neha. And can I just compliment the team for the title that you guys have chosen? Room to grow, because no matter how good you are, there's always room to grow.
Thank you to all of our listeners for staying tuned in. I hope you tune back into our next episode. Until then, this is Neha and Rahul signing out.